Hello again, fellow adventurers, and welcome back to our little home on wheels. You know, we get asked a lot of questions about this life. People want to know about the best places we've seen, the scariest roads we've driven, and, more often than you'd think, how we manage to live in 70 square feet together without driving each other completely mad. That last one always makes me laugh. The truth is, after 30 years of marriage, you either learn to exist in harmony or you learn where the best hiding spots are, and this van doesn't have many hiding spots. But there's one question that comes up, often from people who are dreaming of doing this themselves, maybe when they hit their 50s like we did. They ask what the single most important piece of gear is. Is it the solar panels? The fancy composting toilet? The all-terrain tires? And I always say the same thing. The most important thing you can have in this van isn't a thing at all. It's an adventure buddy. Karen's nodding at me from across our tiny table, a knowing smile on her face. She's the one who really coined the term for us. We were somewhere in the back roads of Spain, a place so remote the GPS just gave up and showed a little picture of a shrub. And something happened that day that cemented this idea for her, for us. I think it's a story worth telling, because it gets to the very heart of why we do this, and how we're able to keep doing it, day in and day out. So, for this one, I'm going to turn it over to her. This is Karen's story, really. It's the reason she believes, with every fiber of her being, that you absolutely need an adventure buddy. Thanks, John. He tells it so seriously, but really, it all started because of a noise. A stupid, little, insignificant noise that decided to show up on the most beautiful day imaginable. We were in the Picos de Europa, in northern Spain. If you've never been, just picture it, jagged limestone peaks ripping holes in a sky so blue it hurt your eyes. The air was crisp and smelled of pine and damp earth, and our van, Florence, was humming along contentedly. We had left the coast behind that morning, waving goodbye to the Bay of Biscay and climbing inland. The plan was simple, as our best and worst plans often are. We were going to take a famous scenic route, the N621, which winds through the Desfiladero de la Hermida, one of the longest and most spectacular gorges in Spain. We'd seen pictures, of course. Photos of a ribbon of asphalt clinging desperately to the side of a cliff, with a turquoise river raging hundreds of feet below. It was exactly the kind of day that makes you feel impossibly small and unbelievably alive all at once. I remember I was navigating, my feet up on the dashboard, a bad habit, I know, and I was tracing our route on a paper map. Yes, a real paper map. Sometimes technology just can't capture the romance of a journey. John was driving, a relaxed grin on his face, his hand tapping a rhythm on the steering wheel in time with some old 70s rock station we'd managed to find. "Can you believe this?" he had asked, not taking his eyes off the road. "This is what we traded spreadsheets and board meetings for." "Best trade we ever made," I replied, feeling a deep sense of peace settle over me. It was perfect. Utterly, completely, cinematographically perfect. And that, of course, is always when trouble decides to knock. It started as a soft ticking sound. Barely audible over the music and the rumble of the diesel engine. "What's that?" I asked, putting my feet down. John cocked his head. "What's what?" "That noise." "A sort of, tick-tick-tick." He turned the radio down. We both listened, our bodies tensed. There it was again. A faint, metallic rhythm that was completely out of sync with the familiar, comforting sounds of Florence. It was like a guest who had shown up to a party uninvited and was tapping their fork against a wine glass to get everyone's attention. "Probably just a stone in the tire tread," John said, with a confidence I didn't quite feel. He's the optimist, the chief engineer, and the head of the "it's probably nothing" department. I'm the head of the "what if it's something" department. It's a delicate balance. We drove on. The gorge walls grew steeper around us, hemming us in. The road narrowed. The river below seemed to get angrier, a churning torrent of white water. And the ticking got louder. It was no longer a polite tap. It had graduated to a definite clank. 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 It was keeping a steady beat with the rotation of the wheels. John's knuckles were white on the steering wheel now. His easy grin was gone, replaced by a tight, focused line. He pulled over at the first available spot, which was little more than a gravelly shoulder carved out of the rock face, barely wider than the van itself. On one side was a solid wall of stone going straight up. On the other, a rather flimsy-looking guardrail and a dizzying drop to the river. He turned off the engine. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the roar of the water below and the frantic thumping of my own heart. "Okay," he said, taking a deep breath. "Let's not panic," which, as everyone knows, is the international signal for, it's time to start panicking. He got out and I followed, my legs feeling a bit shaky. The sheer scale of the place was overwhelming. We were a tiny, insignificant speck of metal and humanity dwarfed by a geological masterpiece. It was a terrible place to be in awe. John was already on his hands and knees, peering under Florence's front end. I stood by, feeling useless, which is one of the worst feelings when you're in a partnership. I'm not a mechanic. My understanding of an internal combustion engine is that you put fuel in one end, turn a key, and magic happens at the other. When the magic stops, my expertise runs out. John slid out from under the van, a smear of grease already on his cheek. "I can't see anything obvious," he said, his voice tight with frustration. "Nothing's hanging off. Nothing looks loose." "So, a stone?" I asked, hopefully. He shook his head. "I don't think so. It sounds internal," he said the word internal, the way a doctor says it to a concerned family member. It meant the problem was deep, hidden, and probably expensive. "Let's try driving a few feet, slowly," he suggested. "You walk alongside and listen. See if you can pinpoint where it's coming from." So that's what we did. I walked beside the van as he crawled forward at a snail's pace. The clanking was horribly loud now, a sick, grinding sound that echoed off the rock wall. It was definitely coming from the front passenger side wheel. "Stop!" I yelled. He did. He got out again, looking grim. "That's not good. That sounds like a wheel bearing. Or worse, something in the CV joint." He might as well have been speaking ancient Greek. All I heard was, "We are profoundly and irrevocably stuck." We stood there for a moment in silence, the two of us, on the side of a Spanish mountain. The magnificent view had transformed from a source of joy into a beautiful, lonely prison. We hadn't seen another car for at least 20 minutes. I pulled out my phone. Of course. No signal. Not a single bar. John checked his. Same thing. This was a new level of stuck for us. We've had flat tires in cities, engine trouble near towns, but this was different. This was isolation. The sun was still high, but the deepness of the gorge cast long, cool shadows over us. A chill that had nothing to do with the temperature started to creep up my spine. "Okay," John said, wiping his hands on a rag from his toolbox. He slammed the van door shut with a bit more force than necessary, a rare crack in his calm facade. "Okay. Plan B." "What's Plan B?" I asked. I didn't even know we had a Plan A. He forced a smile. Plan A was to have a lovely drive. Plan B is, figuring out how we're going to get out of here. This is the moment. This is the moment in van life that the pretty Instagram photos never show you. It's the moment when the freedom of the open road suddenly feels like the terrifying vulnerability of being a turtle without its shell. Your home is broken. Your security is gone. And you're miles from anywhere that feels like help. John, true to form, immediately shifted into practical mode. He opened up the side door and started rummaging. Out came the big toolbox, the heavy-duty jack, the axle stands. His mission was clear: he was going to take the wheel off and diagnose the problem himself. It's his way of taking control, of fighting back against the chaos with logic and wrenches. I, on the other hand, was spiraling. My mind was playing a highlight reel of every possible worst-case scenario. We'd be stuck here forever. A landslide would come and sweep us into the river. We'd have to abandon Florence and all our belongings and live out our days as goatherds. My brain has a flair for the dramatic. I watched him work for a few minutes. He was focused, methodical, his movements sure and practiced. He chalked the back wheels, loosened the lug nuts, and positioned the jack. But the ground was uneven gravel, and the van is heavy. Getting it lifted safely was a struggle. He grunted with effort, his face beaded with sweat. And that's when I realized something crucial. We were working as individuals, not as a team. He was in his world of mechanics and metal, and I was in my world of anxiety and catastrophizing. We weren't a team. We were just two people in the same bad situation. "Stop," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. He paused, looking up at me, clearly annoyed at the interruption. "What is it, Karen? I'm kind of in the middle of something here." "I know. But this isn't going to work. What if you take it all apart and you can't fix it? Or worse, you can't get it back together? Then we're not just broken down, we're in pieces. We need help. Real help." He sighed, wiping his brow with the back of a greasy hand. He knew I was right. His mechanical skills are great for maintenance and minor repairs, but this was sounding major. We were out of our depth. "Okay, wise guy," he said, his frustration softening a little. "What do you suggest?" "We can't call anyone. One of us has to walk," I said simply. We both looked down the road in the direction we'd come from. It disappeared around a sharp bend. Then we looked in the direction we were heading. It, too, vanished into the shadows of the gorge. We had no idea how far it was to the nearest town in either direction. The map was no help, it showed the road, but the scale was too large to judge walking distance. The last village we passed, Potes, must be 10, maybe 15 kilometers back, John estimated. And we don't know what's ahead. A 15-kilometer walk. Uphill, mostly. The thought was daunting. "I'll stay," John said immediately. "I'm not leaving the van." "You should go. Walk back towards Potes. It's a bigger town, you're more likely to find a garage there." My first instinct was fear. Walk alone. 4 hours. But then I looked at him, standing there protectively beside our broken home, and I looked at my own 2 hands, which were clean and useless for fixing things. He was the mechanic, his place was here. I was the one with a few dozen words of passable Spanish and a friendly smile. That was my tool. It was our aha moment. A quiet, unstated realization. We each had a role to play that the other couldn't. He had the practical skills to guard our fort. I had the communication skills, however limited, to go out and find the cavalry. We were a team again. "Okay," I said, taking a deep breath and trying to sound brave. "Okay. I'll go. What do I need?" We sprang into action, our shared purpose giving us new energy. John filled a water bottle for me. I put on my sturdiest walking shoes and grabbed a light jacket. We decided that I would walk forward, into the unknown, rather than backtracking. The logic was simple: we were on a popular tourist route. There had to be something up ahead. A town, a cafe, another viewpoint. Something. "If you're not back by sunset, I don't know what I'll do," he said, trying to make a joke of it, but his eyes were full of genuine worry. "I'll be back long before that," I promised, giving him a quick hug. "Probably with a tow truck and a bottle of Rioja." "Just find help," he said softly. "Be safe." And with that, I set off. I walked out from the shadow of the cliff into the bright afternoon sun and started down the road, feeling ridiculously small and incredibly determined. Every step I took away from the van felt like stretching a rubber band. I kept looking back, and for the first few hundred meters, I could see John, a tiny figure standing guard next to our big white box. Then I rounded a bend, and he was gone. I was completely, utterly on my own. The walk was both terrifying and beautiful. With every step, the roar of the river below was my constant companion. Lizards skittered off the warm asphalt as I approached. A huge griffin vulture circled high above me, riding the thermals. I tried to focus on the beauty, to push away the thoughts of mountain lions and madmen that my anxious brain kept trying to serve up. I walked for what felt like an eternity. My legs began to ache. The water bottle was half empty. I passed a handful of cars going the other way, but they were moving too fast, their drivers focused on the hairpin turns. I tried flagging one down, but they just waved back cheerfully, assuming I was a friendly hiker. I must have looked like a lunatic, a middle-aged woman power-walking down a remote highway with a desperate look in her eyes. I was just about to give up hope, to sit down on the side of the road and have a good cry, when I rounded another bend and saw it. It wasn't a town. It was barely a hamlet. A cluster of maybe 5 stone houses with red-tiled roofs, clinging to the mountainside like barnacles. Smoke curled from a single chimney. It was the most beautiful sight I had ever seen. My pace quickened. As I got closer, I saw a sign for a bar-restaurante Salvation. I practically ran the last 100 yards, my heart pounding with relief. I pushed open the heavy wooden door and stepped inside. The interior was dark and cool, a welcome respite from the sun. The air smelled of stale beer, cured ham, and wood smoke. A couple of old men sat at a small table, playing cards and speaking in low, guttural Spanish. An ancient-looking television was mounted in the corner, showing a soap opera to an empty room. Behind the bar, a man with a weathered face and a magnificent white mustache was meticulously wiping a glass. He looked up as I entered, his expression a mixture of surprise and curiosity. Strangers, especially strangers on foot, were clearly not a common occurrence. This was it. The moment of truth. All my Duolingo lessons, all my phrasebook practice, it all came down to this. I walked up to the bar. "Hola," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "Buenas," he replied, his eyes assessing me. I took a deep breath. "Mi coche está roto," my car is broken. I pointed back down the road. "En la carretera," on the road. He nodded slowly, his expression unchanging. "Necesito un mecánico," I continued, stumbling over the words. "I need a mechanic." Then I tried to explain the problem. This was the hard part. I didn't know the Spanish word for wheel bearing or CV joint, so I resorted to the universal language of desperation, interpretive dance. I pointed to my shoulder to represent the wheel, and then I made a circular motion with my hand, accompanied by a horrible grinding noise I made with my throat. Clank, clank, clank. Roto. Muy malo. I must have looked completely unhinged. The old men at the table had stopped their card game and were watching my performance with unconcealed amusement. The bartender, however, just stared at me. For a moment, I thought he was going to tell me to leave. Then, a slow smile spread across his face, crinkling the corners of his eyes. He let out a short laugh. "Ah! El cojonete de la rueda. The wheel bearing." I could have kissed him. Sí. Sí. Cojonete. I repeated the word, locking it away in my memory. He said something fast in Spanish that I didn't understand. He saw the blank look on my face and simplified. He pointed to himself. Mateo, then he pointed to a landline phone on the wall. A real, actual phone with a curly cord. He made a cranking motion with his hand and then spoke into an imaginary receiver. He was going to make a call. He picked up the phone, spoke into it for a few minutes in rapid-fire Spanish, then hung up. He looked at me and pointed down the road, in the direction I had been walking. He held up 2 fingers. 2 kilómetros, 2 kilometers. Then he pointed to a picture of a tow truck. Mi hermano. Carlos. Viena, my brother. Carlos. He is coming. Relief washed over me so powerfully my knees felt weak. I managed to stammer out, gracias. Muchísimas gracias, señor. I bought a bottle of water and a bar of chocolate, paid him, and left a tip that was probably absurdly large, but I didn't care. Mateo, my mustachioed savior, had just rescued our entire day, our entire trip. I walked back out into the sunshine, feeling 10 feet tall. I had done it. I had faced the unknown, communicated across a language barrier, and found help. It took about 40 minutes for the tow truck to arrive. It wasn't so much a tow truck as a very old, very dusty pickup truck with a winch on the back. Driving it was a man who was the spitting image of Mateo, only without the mustache and with a lot more grease on his shirt. This had to be Carlos. He pulled up alongside me. "Karen?" he asked. I nodded. He gestured for me to get in, and we drove the short distance back to where Florence and John were waiting. The sight of that rusty pickup truck appearing around the bend was, for John, a vision of pure beauty. He had been imagining the worst, convinced I'd been carried off by a vulture. His face when I hopped out of the passenger seat was a picture of profound relief. Carlos was a man of few words. He grunted a hello to John, walked over to the van, and gave the front wheel a good, hard kick. The van rattled. Carlos nodded to himself, as if this had confirmed his diagnosis. He and John then had a 10-minute conversation that consisted mostly of pointing, gesturing, and the occasional shared mechanical term that transcends language, like bearing and kaput. In the end, Carlos decided he couldn't tow us with his old truck. The road was too narrow and the van was too heavy. But he had a different plan. He disappeared into the back of his pickup and returned with a ridiculously large hammer and a can of thick grease. For the next 20 minutes, he proceeded to perform what I can only describe as roadside surgery. There was a lot of banging. A lot of Spanish swearing. And a lot of grease. He managed to jam the broken bearing back into a semblance of its former self and pack it with grease. It was a temporary fix. A very, very temporary fix. He looked at John and said, "Despacio. Muy, muy despacio, slowly. Very, very slowly." He would lead the way to his garage in the next town, a place called Camellino. And so began the slowest, most nerve-wracking drive of our lives. We followed Carlos's taillights at no more than 10 miles per hour. Every tiny noise from the front wheel made me jump. John drove with the focus of a bomb disposal expert. But we were moving. We weren't stuck anymore. We had been rescued. We finally limped into the small town of Camellino and pulled into Carlos's garage. It was a humble, cluttered place filled with the comfortable chaos of a life spent fixing things. Carlos confirmed that we needed a new part, which he would have to order from the city. It would take a day. Maybe 2. So, we were stranded again, but this time it was different. We weren't on a lonely cliffside, we were in a community. Carlos told us we could park the van in the lot beside the garage for the night. That evening, his brother Mateo closed his bar early and came to find us. He insisted we join his family for dinner. We spent the evening in a warm, noisy kitchen, eating a hearty stew and drinking rustic red wine from a glass pitcher. We communicated through a combination of my broken Spanish, their broken English, and the universal language of laughter. We told them about our life on the road, about leaving our old lives behind. They told us about their lives in the Picos, a world away from everything we had known. It was an evening that never would have happened if Florence hadn't broken down. It was a moment of genuine human connection, born from a moment of crisis. We weren't tourists passing through anymore, we were the people with the broken van, and that, strangely, made us part of their world for a little while. Lying in the van that night, parked next to the silent garage, I thought about the day's events. I looked over at John, who was already fast asleep, exhausted from the stress and the slow, careful driving. And I knew, with absolute certainty, why this life works for us. It's because of the adventure buddy. It's not about having someone to split the driving with, or someone to help you read the map. It's about having someone whose strengths are your weaknesses. When we were stuck on that cliff, I was useless with the tools, but John was in his element. He knew what to look for, what to try. His practical nature kept us from spiraling into total despair. But he would have been lost trying to explain the problem in a tiny Spanish bar. That was my moment. My silly interpretive dance and my handful of Spanish words were the key that unlocked our rescue. He was the anchor, and I was the messenger. He was the engineer, and I was the diplomat. Alone, either one of us would have been in serious trouble. John might have eventually taken the whole wheel assembly apart and been unable to fix it. I might have just sat on the side of the road and cried, too scared to walk for help. But together, we were a complete unit. We were a team. And that's what an adventure buddy is. It's the person who fills in your gaps. It's the hand you hold when you're scared, the voice of calm when you're panicking, and the person who can make a grinding noise with their throat in a bar full of strangers because you need them to. Living this life after 50, trading routine for the complete unknown, it's not for the faint of heart. It will test you. It will break you down, sometimes literally on the side of a mountain. And in those moments, the quality of your solar panels doesn't matter. What matters is the quality of the person sitting next to you. 2 days later, Florence was fixed. Carlos charged us an amount that was so reasonable it felt like a gift. We said our goodbyes to him and to Mateo, who sent us off with a loaf of homemade bread and a bottle of his family's wine. As we drove away, carefully at first, then with growing confidence, the van felt whole again. And so did we. That experience changed us. It deepened our trust in each other and our faith in the kindness of strangers. It reminded us that the greatest moments of this journey are often the ones that you never, ever planned for. The breakdowns, the detours, the unexpected stops, that's where the real magic is. That's where the stories are. So that's my story. That's why I believe the most essential thing you need for this life isn't a part of the van, it's a part of your heart. It's your adventure buddy. She's right, you know. I remember standing there on that road, watching her figure get smaller and smaller until she disappeared around the bend. It was one of the scariest moments of my life, not because I was worried about the van, but because I was sending my partner, my best friend, out into the unknown on her own. But I trusted her. And she trusted me to hold down the fort. That trust is the engine that really keeps us going. The Picos de Europa are still one of our favorite places on Earth, not just for the stunning views, but for the memory of that breakdown. It's a reminder that every challenge is just an opportunity for connection in disguise. Tomorrow, we're heading east, towards the French border. We heard about a little mountain pass from a fellow traveler we met yesterday, one that's supposed to have some incredible Roman ruins at the top. We don't know what we'll find, but we know we'll find it together. Thanks for joining us for this story. We hope it gave you a little glimpse into the reality behind the dream. Until next time, keep exploring, be open to the detours, and live fully, 1 mile and one unforgettable story at a time.